Every single day, roughly 2,000 more Americans cross a line they never saw coming. One day, they're just a little forgetful. The next, a doctor is saying the word dementia, and their whole family's world tilts sideways. Here's the part that should stop you in your tracks. Dementia doesn't show up overnight. It sends warning signals for years, sometimes a full decade, before anyone gets an official diagnosis. The problem is, almost nobody knows what those signals actually look like, so they get waved off. Blamed on stress, blamed on being tired, blamed on just getting older. I've watched this happen in real families. Someone starts forgetting little things and everybody laughs it off. Oh, you're having a senior moment. And maybe that's all it is, but sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it's the opening chapter of something much bigger, and the earlier you catch it, the more options you have. Today, I'm walking you through 5 early warning signs that doctors and researchers say separate normal aging from something that needs a closer look. We're not talking about vague, scary internet checklists here. This is based on real published guidance from organizations that study this for a living. And stick around for sign number 3, because it's one almost nobody associates with memory at all, and it's often the very first thing anyone notices, years before the memory problems even start. Before we get into it, drop a comment and tell me, how old are you, and has anyone in your family dealt with memory changes? I read every single comment, and honestly, it shapes what I cover in future videos. All right, let's get into why this is spiking after 60 in the first place. Then we'll break down the 5 signs one by one, along with what's actually happening inside the brain and nervous system when this occurs. Why dementia risk climbs so fast after 60. Here's the number that puts this whole video in context. Right now, an estimated 6.9 million Americans aged 65 and older are living with Alzheimer's dementia alone. And that's just one type of dementia, not counting the others, like vascular dementia, Lewy body dementia, and frontotemporal dementia. About 1 in 9 people 65 and up already has it. But here's where it gets steep. At ages 65 to 74, the rate is around 5%. Push into the 75 to 84 range, and it jumps to over 13%. Cross into 85 and beyond, and it's roughly 1 in 3. That's not a gentle slope. That's a cliff. And the reason after 60 specifically matters is that this is usually when the earliest, subtlest signs start creeping in, long before anyone would call it dementia. Researchers now understand that the underlying neurodegeneration, the gradual breakdown of neurons and the connections or synapses between them, behind Alzheimer's and other dementias can begin building 10, even 20 years before symptoms are obvious enough for a clinical diagnosis. During Alzheimer's specifically, 2 biological processes get most of the attention. The buildup of a sticky protein called amyloid beta into plaques between neurons, and the formation of twisted fibers called tau tangles inside neurons. Both are believed to interfere with normal cell signaling and, over time, contribute to cell death in memory-related brain regions. There's also a recognized in-between stage called mild cognitive impairment, or MCI. This is a state where someone shows measurable changes in memory or thinking, often something a spouse or close friend notices before the person does, but the changes aren't severe enough to interfere with daily independence the way dementia does. Not everyone with MCI goes on to develop dementia. Some people stay stable, and some even improve, especially if an underlying treatable cause is identified. But MCI is considered an important window for evaluation because it's often the earliest point where a clinician can meaningfully intervene, which means the version of this that you can actually catch early, the version where you still have options, where a neurologist or geriatrician can run cognitive screening tools and catch something reversible, is happening right now, quietly for a lot of people watching this video. So what actually separates "I forgot where I put my keys" from "this might be something more"? That's exactly what we're covering. Let's start with sign number 1. Sign 1, memory loss that disrupts daily life. Not just occasional forgetfulness, everybody forgets things. You walk into a room and blank on why you're there. You forget an old coworker's name until it pops back into your head an hour later. That's completely normal. Your brain is not a filing cabinet. It drops things, especially the small stuff, and that's true at every age because normal aging involves some natural, gradual slowing in how quickly the brain encodes and retrieves new information. The warning sign version looks different. It's not "I forgot," it's "I forgot," and it's now interfering with how I function. That means forgetting recently learned information and then never being able to recall it, even with hints or prompts, a pattern that points toward a problem with short-term memory consolidation, the process by which the hippocampus, a small seahorse-shaped structure deep in the brain, helps convert a new experience into a lasting memory. It means asking the same question 5 times in one conversation, not because you're distracted, but because the earlier answer genuinely didn't get stored in the first place. It means relying more and more on sticky notes, reminder apps, pill organizers, or a family member to keep track of things you used to just know. Picture this scenario because it's incredibly common. Someone starts calling their daughter 3 times in one afternoon, asking the exact same question each time with zero memory of the first 2 calls. Or they forget a grandchild's name, we're not misspeak, but genuinely can't place who this person is for a moment. That's a different category of forgetting than losing your car keys, and it's the kind of pattern that a clinician might screen for using a brief cognitive test, like the mini mental state examination or the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, both of which check short-term recall alongside other cognitive domains. The Alzheimer's Association draws this line clearly, occasionally forgetting a name or an appointment and then remembering it later, normal aging, needing constant reminders about your own schedule, forgetting important dates entirely, or increasingly depending on others for things you used to manage independently. That's the pattern worth paying attention to. If this is sounding familiar for someone in your life, don't panic, but don't dismiss it either. That's what sign number 1 is really about, not the isolated slip-up, but the pattern, and whether that pattern is genuinely disrupting daily functioning. Sign 2, trouble planning, problem solving, or following familiar steps. This one surprises people because it doesn't look like memory loss at all on the surface. It shows up as difficulty with things that require a sequence, a plan, a set of steps, a bit of mental math. Neurologists sometimes refer to this cluster of abilities as executive function, the mental toolkit responsible for organizing, planning, sequencing tasks, and holding several pieces of information in mind at once. Executive function relies heavily on the frontal lobes, the part of the brain right behind your forehead, which is also involved in judgment and impulse control, something that becomes relevant again later in this video. Think about a recipe someone has made 100 times. Suddenly they're lost halfway through, unsure what comes next. Or paying monthly bills. Something that used to take 20 minutes now takes hours, or gets forgotten entirely, or the numbers just stop making sense the way they used to. Concentration becomes a real struggle. Tasks that were once automatic now require intense, visible effort, and even then, mistakes creep in. Normal aging might mean making the occasional math error, balancing a checkbook, or needing a bit more time to learn a new gadget. That's just brain processing speed naturally shifting with age. It happens to everyone, and it doesn't mean the underlying reasoning ability is impaired. The concerning version is different in kind, not just degree. It's a noticeable, sustained decline in the ability to develop and follow a plan at all, especially for things that were once second nature, and it often correlates with reduced attention span and difficulty multitasking. Family members often describe this one as, they just seem foggier or they can't follow along like they used to. If a loved one who used to run their own household finances suddenly can't track a bill, or someone who cooked their whole life keeps getting lost mid-recipe, that's the kind of change worth mentioning to a doctor. Not because it definitely means something serious, but because it's exactly the type of shift that's worth having evaluated through a formal neuropsychological assessment, which is a more in-depth battery of cognitive tests than a quick office screening. Sign 3, a change nobody expects, shifts in mood, personality, or motivation. Here's the one I told you to wait for, because most people picture dementia as a purely memory problem. It's not. Mood and personality changes are often among the very earliest signs, sometimes showing up before the classic memory symptoms do. And they're frequently tied to changes in brain regions involved in emotional regulation, including parts of the frontal and temporal lobes. This can look like someone who was always easygoing becoming unusually anxious, suspicious, or fearful, especially outside their comfort zone. It can look like a naturally social person suddenly pulling away from hobbies, friends, or family gatherings they used to love, not because they're busy, but because those situations now feel confusing or overwhelming, sometimes due to underlying sensory or cognitive overload. It can look like flashes of irritation, agitation, or distress that seem out of character, particularly when a routine gets disrupted. Clinicians sometimes group these under the umbrella term neuropsychiatric symptoms, and they're recognized as a legitimate and common feature of the early dementia process, not just an emotional side effect. The tricky part is that everyone gets moody sometimes. Everyone has days they'd rather stay home. The distinction researchers point to is about degree and persistence. Developing a strong preference for routine and getting mildly annoyed when it's disrupted, that's a normal, common trait, especially as people age. But a noticeable, sustained shift into confusion, suspicion, fearfulness, apathy, or withdrawal from things someone used to genuinely enjoy, that's different, and it's worth paying attention to, especially when it shows up alongside any of the other signs on this list. This is also honestly one of the hardest signs for families to talk about, because it can feel like blaming someone for their own personality or like pathologizing normal grief, retirement adjustment, or life stress. It's not about blame, it's about noticing a pattern shift and getting it looked at, ideally by a physician who can also rule out treatable contributors like depression, chronic pain, medication side effects, or thyroid dysfunction, all of which can mimic or worsen these symptoms. Sign 4, losing track of time, place, or how to get somewhere familiar. This is the one people often picture as the classic dementia sign, and for good reason. It tends to become one of the most visible. It's losing track of dates, seasons, or the passage of time. It's forgetting where you are or how you got there. It's the drive home you've made 1,000 times suddenly feeling unfamiliar, like the street signs belong to a different neighborhood entirely. This kind of disorientation is often linked to changes in the parietal and temporal lobes, brain regions involved in spatial awareness and navigation. Normal aging can absolutely include losing track of what day of the week it is and then figuring it out shortly after. That happens to plenty of people who are cognitively completely fine, especially during retirement when the structure of a work week disappears. The warning sign version is more disorienting and doesn't resolve as easily, genuinely not knowing how much time has passed, forgetting where you are or how you arrived there, or struggling to find your way somewhere that used to be completely automatic, sometimes described clinically as impaired visuospatial function. There's a related piece of this too, trouble judging distance or understanding visual information, which can affect things like reading, judging steps, misjudging curbs or stairs, or even recognizing objects and colors correctly. It's not really a vision problem in the eye doctor sense. The eyes themselves may be working fine. It's the brain having a harder time processing and interpreting what the eyes are actually seeing, a distinction doctors sometimes describe as a visual perceptual or visuoperceptual deficit rather than an ophthalmologic one. If someone gets turned around in a place they've navigated for decades, or seems disoriented about what day, month, or even year it is in a way that doesn't quickly self-correct, that's a meaningfully different situation than a passing, "wait, what day is it?" moment. And it's often one of the symptoms that prompts a formal referral for brain imaging, such as an MRI or CT scan, to look for structural changes or rule out other causes like a stroke or fluid buildup. Sign 5, new problems with words, conversation, or judgment. The last sign covers two things that tend to travel together: language trouble and poor judgment. On the language side, this looks like stopping mid-conversation with no idea how to continue, or repeating yourself without realizing it. It can look like struggling to find the right word and substituting an odd one instead, calling a watch a hand clock, for example, a phenomenon sometimes referred to as word-finding difficulty, or in more advanced cases, anomia. Vocabulary that used to flow easily starts to feel just out of reach, and some people compensate by using vaguer, more generic language to talk around a word they can't retrieve. On the judgment side, it's decisions that seem uncharacteristically off, giving large sums of money to telemarketers or unnecessary services, dressing in a way that doesn't match the weather at all, several layers on a warm day, or almost nothing in the cold, letting personal hygiene or grooming slip in a way that's genuinely new for that person. It also frequently shows up as misplacing items in bizarre places, a wallet in the freezer, keys in the sugar bowl, and notably being unable to retrace steps to find them, sometimes even accusing others of stealing, a response that can stem from both memory impairment and, in some cases, emerging paranoid thinking tied to the underlying neurological changes. Everyone occasionally blanks on a word bavoirs that's completely normal at any age. Everyone misplaces something now and then. The distinguishing factor is the same theme running through this whole list: frequency, severity, and the inability to backtrack or self-correct the way a person normally would. What actually causes all this, and the part that should give you hope? So why does the brain do this? At a basic level, dementia is an umbrella term, not a single disease, i.e. It describes a cluster of symptoms caused by progressive damage to brain cells, or neurons, and the network of connections between them, disrupting the systems responsible for memory, reasoning, language, spatial awareness, and judgment. Alzheimer's disease, driven largely by that amyloid and tau buildup we talked about earlier, is the most common underlying cause, accounting for a majority of dementia cases. But it's not the only one. Vascular dementia, the second most common type, results from reduced blood flow to the brain, often following a stroke or a series of small, sometimes unnoticed strokes called silent strokes, which damage brain tissue by cutting off its oxygen and nutrient supply. Lewy body dementia involves abnormal protein deposits called Lewy bodies, and often comes with additional symptoms like visual hallucinations, sleep disturbances, and movement changes similar to Parkinson's disease. Frontotemporal dementia specifically targets the frontal and temporal lobes and tends to affect personality, behavior, and language earlier and more prominently than memory. And it's not uncommon for someone to have mixed dementia, meaning more than one of these processes happening simultaneously. For example, both Alzheimer's-related changes and vascular damage together. Here's the genuinely hopeful part, and it's backed by serious research. A major 2024 scientific review, the Lancet Commission on Dementia Prevention, concluded that roughly 45% of dementia cases worldwide are tied to factors that can potentially be addressed. That review identified 14 modifiable risk factors across a person's lifetime, including things like uncorrected hearing loss, high LDL cholesterol, untreated vision loss, high blood pressure, hypertension, physical inactivity, smoking, excessive alcohol use, obesity, type 2 diabetes, depression, social isolation, lower education levels, air pollution exposure, and traumatic brain injury. That doesn't mean dementia is always preventable. Plenty of it isn't, and genetics, including certain gene variants like APOE-E4, along with age itself, play a real role no lifestyle change can fully offset. But it does mean the picture isn't hopeless or purely a matter of luck. Getting hearing checked and treated with hearing aids if needed. Managing blood pressure and cholesterol through diet, exercise, or medication as prescribed by a physician. Staying physically active, which supports healthy blood flow or cerebral perfusion to the brain. Staying socially and mentally engaged instead of isolated. Managing blood sugar if you have diabetes or prediabetes. Protecting your head from injury and wearing seat belts and helmets. These aren't miracle cures, but the research suggests they meaningfully shift the odds over a lifetime. There's also a concept researchers call cognitive reserve, essentially the brain's ability to improvise and find alternate routes when some neural pathways are damaged. People with higher cognitive reserve, often built through years of education, mentally engaging work, learning new skills, or an intellectually active lifestyle, sometimes show fewer outward symptoms even when brain scans reveal significant underlying pathology. It's part of why two people can have similar levels of amyloid or vascular damage on imaging and present very differently in terms of day-to-day function. This is also why activities like learning a language, picking up an instrument, or simply staying curious and mentally challenged throughout life are frequently mentioned alongside physical health measures in dementia prevention research, not as a guarantee, but as another lever that appears to matter. What to actually do with this information. If you recognized one or two of these signs in yourself or in someone you love, take a breath first. A single moment of forgetfulness, one bad day, one uncharacteristic comment, a satuo. None of that means dementia. These signs are about sustained patterns, not isolated incidents, and plenty of things that aren't dementia at all. Stress, poor sleep, certain medications, thyroid dysfunction, vitamin B12 or other nutrient deficiencies, urinary tract infections in older adults, chronic pain, and even depression can produce very similar symptoms and are often reversible or treatable once identified. This is exactly why doctors often describe an evaluation for suspected dementia as a workup, involving blood tests, a physical and neurological exam, cognitive screening, and sometimes brain imaging, precisely to rule out these other more treatable explanations before settling on a dementia diagnosis. The move isn't to self-diagnose off a YouTube video, and it's definitely not to panic. It's to pay attention to the pattern, and if it's persistent or getting worse, bring it to a primary care physician, who can then refer to a neurologist, geriatrician, or geriatric psychiatrist if needed for more specialized evaluation. Early evaluation matters, not because there's necessarily a cure waiting, but because an accurate diagnosis opens doors. Ruling out reversible causes, accessing support services and caregiver resources, planning ahead legally and financially while someone can still meaningfully participate in those decisions, and in some cases, starting treatments or clinical trials that tend to work best when started early in the disease process. Now I want to hear from you. Which of these 5 signs surprised you the most? Have you noticed any of these in yourself or someone you love? Drop it in the comments. I read everyone. And if enough of you are dealing with this, I'll dig into what happens after a diagnosis, including what a neurological workup actually involves, in a future video. And if this helped connect some dots for you, share it with someone who needs to see it. Sometimes the person who catches the pattern first is the one who changes everything that comes next.